Hi, I'm Arthur, and this is part 10 in a 20-part series I am doing covering fan-favorite chapters of Space Marines in Order of the Legions. Do you need to have seen the other parts to understand this one? No, but it would make me happy. Covering the Iron Hand's successors is either a treat or absolutely impossible, depending on your circumstances. So this one was tough, sort of, because this entire series is dedicated to people who request chapters to be covered, or just fan favorites in general. So fun fact, I'm not going to name names, but a few YouTubers that I've been talking to behind the scenes have told me that they genuinely think the Iron Lord's successor chapter of Space Marines are actually surprisingly cool, which is weird because they are a bit obscure. I can't help but agree after reading through a few of their short stories as well as just, the general lore that they have. Though I definitely have dunked on their pain scheme a little bit in the past. I mean, come on, it's the Iron Hands wearing red pants, but I will say they are pretty fun as a chapter, and I do enjoy their scheme to some degree. Even if a percentage of that enjoyment is just ironic, to discuss them, there is actually a little bit to know. Though much like with a lot of other successor chapters of this sort of ilk, you do have that tendency for them to be brought up maybe once in a blue moon, but it's always a delight to see that happen. They have a bit of a fun shtick, which I will get into later, but it's basically they're just incredibly xenophobic. So let's start at the beginning, or at least as close to the beginning with these individuals as we possibly can, and just kind of break it down from there. The Iron Lords are a distinguished chapter that is of an unknown founding, likely to be around M37 or M38. As it's mentioned around M41 that they have a minimum of a 3,000-year service record that can be tracked and traced back, so that kind of narrows it down a little bit. They were created specifically with a hatred of Xenos in mind, as they were to look after a small section of space occupied by some obscure Xeno species so dangerous that a Space Marine chapter needed to be dedicated to their wiping out, and the Iron Lords as a whole-ass chapter is having trouble wiping them out after 3,000 years. This section of space is known as the Grendel Stars, which is a dope-ass name, and the alien species itself is known as the Barghesi. These aliens are allegedly so dangerous that even in the modern day, the Iron Lords went back to protecting the Grendel Stars, even after they had been called to deal with other duties outside of their range that almost decimated the chapter. I'll get into why I think the Barghesi are so dangerous, but it ties back to the biggest thing the Iron Lords have had to contend with for a while now, and that is the invasion of the Tyranids. See, there are several splinter fleets that have actually been stated to several times invade the Grendel Stars specifically to get the Barghesi's genetic code. And in that, it has been stated numerous times already that if that were to happen, that'd be a bad thing. Like, it's stated by several Inquisitors from the Ordo Xenos, many Iron Lords higher-ups, and I find that's a very interesting principle. That's a very interesting idea. It's because, the Tyranids have gotten a hold of over a million genetic codes, and a million different species have been assimilated into their biomass. Hell, probably billions at this point. And it's kind of wacky to think that the Barghesi are such a tipping point that if the Tyranids get a single one, it's going to be such a tipping point for the entirety of their campaign to destroy and consume the entirety of the Imperium. But I'll get into why I think that is a little bit later. The Iron Lords, in terms of disposition, are very similar to that of their kin with the other Iron Hands successors, which is pretty normal. They tend to have very strong ties to each other, though they are described as being especially unbending. The rules are the rules type beat, so never break them and there won't be a problem. If you do, probably dead. Tyrannical in their approach, though that is likely necessary due to them being so heavily taxed. They are constantly fighting a battle with a Xenos so horrible that it makes even Space Marines have issues with them in a prolonged campaign. but they are containing the Barghesi, which is interesting. And that containment is actually referred to as the Iron Grip, which is 14 sort of miniature fortress monasteries that are placed around the entirety of the Grendel Stars named Holdfasts. They are key points in the Grendel Stars that the Iron Lords need to take hold of in order to, keep them intact. It's also to monitor if anybody enters or if any Tyranid activity is spotted, and, react as quickly as possible. Essentially, they have an iron grip over the Grendel Stars in this way, which is really cool conceptually, as this concept is represented in their chapter symbol, which is an iron-handed fist gripping the edge of a star. I think it's cute that a lot of chapters take into account what they represent into their iconography. It makes it super, super interesting. They have been called off to several different campaigns to fight other Xenos factions, which makes a hell of a lot of sense. It's like getting Scythes of the Emperor to show up and fight Tyranids. They're naturally just predisposed to be really good at fighting that specific species, but the Iron Lords are part of this specific group of Space Marines I call the Kings of Racism, which are a bunch of chapters that are specifically dedicated to killing anything that isn't human. They have this massive hate boner for every species of Xeno out there, and hell, some abhumans, they get a little bit twitchy if they stand too close to them. Like, another example of this specific list are the Marines Errant. The veterans of the Marines Errant get especially irritated even if they're nearby an Ogren, for fuck's sake. But they get the job done, so I guess it's chill? Side note, fun fact, additionally, a little bit of an addendum, asterisk, they actually have beacons all over the Grendel Stars that tell people to run away and do not come here. But a lot of people avoiding the Imperium, such as just renegades and people who have been excommunicated or deemed traitors, end up going there assuming that it's a sanctuary that's been abandoned, and then they usually get torn apart by whatever the Barghesi is, or being shot to pieces by the Iron Lords so that the Barghesi don't interact with them, or, Barghesi don't steal their tech and sneak out. So with all the basics out of the way, let's go into something that we haven't really discussed at this point, which is, what even is a Barghesi? Well, I don't know. I don't think many people do, actually. There are only a few times where the Barghesi are even mentioned, and they do not really get much of a description. We get to see the aftermath of a bunch of dead Space Marines, which have been torn to pieces by claws, and I think that makes them super interesting, but it also has a lot of implications that they are a technologically advanced civilization, or at least similar to like the Rakghoul, where they're monstrous beasts, but they have tech that are hyper-specialized to them. So there's a bunch of fun concept art that's also out there to show what the Barghesi could look like, and I think that's really cool, but I don't think it's canon. I know I might be wrong, but I have my own kind of headcanon as to what they look like. Capturing them alive is incredibly difficult. There's even a short story about trying to defend a single living Barghesi that was captured by a small ship of Iron Lords as they were trying to take it back to one of the holdfasts. And the Tyranids were trying to tear it apart. The Barghesi had to be under a mix of stasis and sedation, because apparently both needed to be used, which is insane. So my theory as to why they are dangerous is a bit obtuse and probably incorrect, but why not? It's fun to kind of theory craft about this. We can weed out a few things about them as to why the Tyranids are so obsessed with them, like probably not the fact that they're a technologically advanced civilization, as the Tyranids have definitely consumed Leagues of Votan, they have consumed Tau, they have consumed other more advanced civilizations, and so on, and it's never really shown up properly. They can't be super strong in terms of like just physical strength, as Tyranids kind of already have that one on lock, creating kaiju just retroactively all the time and just making them better. They can't be too fast, they can't be just genetically okay at something. It's not like the Tyranids are going after them because they have a better wing structure. I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I don't think that the reason why the Tyranids are so obsessed with getting the Barghesi is conventional. Like, it has to be some kind of esoteric nonsense that would make them a lot more of a threat, and I think would synchronize well with how Tyranids operate. My idea is based off of the name that was given to them, the Barghesi, so I could be wrong and the name could be descended from something else, but it likely got its name from, and if you've played D&D, you've probably heard this before, the Barghest. The Barghest is in European folklore, excuse me if I'm getting this wrong, it's been a while, and I'm assuming it's English in, origination, or at least somewhere around there. Think of it similar to like a banshee, where it's some kind of spectral dog-like creature that shows up only at night, and if you see it, it means you are either going to die or it is going to kill you within a certain period of time. Typical psychopomp shit. But I'm actually going to say that the idea they use for the Barghesi is actually from D&D, where if you haven't played D&D, the Barghest has a mechanic. This mechanic is if it eats a corpse, it gets significantly larger and significantly stronger. If it eats enough corpses, it becomes a greater Barghest, where its abilities just get heightened more and more. I think that this is kind of what the Barghesi does, where it will consume the flesh of the living or dead, and because of that, it's able to immediately become significantly stronger just by eating something. So if the Tyranids were to get that, that would immediately make them a significantly larger threat, because that would mean they could create Tyranid bioforms that could actively process biomass on the field and become stronger just actively while in a combat scenario, rather than having them die or drag it back to the melting pits and then have the brood cycle continue with stronger Tyranids. They could just actively make things better while they were on the field. Yeah, active evolution while fighting is kind of a dangerous idea, and I don't think there are many Tyranids in history that have this kind of thing in them. I know with things like the Lictor or the Death Leaper can adjust certain bodily processes in order to gain advantages in terms of stealth, but that's not really a big mechanic elsewhere. This is literally just a long shot theory, but if the Barghesi were these weird demon dogs from folklore, it would make sense as to why the Tyranids want them so bad and are willing to sacrifice a lot of biomass to get them. Is this correct? No. I absolutely can guarantee you that if we ever find out what a Barghesi is and learn more about them, that's definitely not what they are, and it's going to be something like, I don't know, they have a faster processing brain or like an innately psychic species that would make the synapse better. But I think it's interesting to think that they could represent that big of a threat, that an entire chapter of Space Marines had to be dedicated to just murdering them for over 3,000 years. It's not going to be correct, but I like the idea that there is some Black Library writer out there who is watching this video somehow and sweating bullets because I've cracked his code or some shit. But regardless, what do you all think about the Iron Lords, the Grendel Stars, and even the Barghesi? Specifically, what do you think makes the Barghesi so dangerous that they need to be quarantined in a small star system and watched forever? Let me know in the comments. Alongside that, remember to like and subscribe as it significantly helps the channel. Special thanks to my channel members, and if you want to support me as well as the channel, then become a channel member today. You gain access to early content at the lowest tier and additional content at the highest. Thanks once again for watching, and for those wondering, yes, I'm probably going to run out of successor chapters for the Iron Hands to talk about at some point, but that shit hasn't happened yet, so I'm going to run this into the ground if I need to.